The containment breach alarm sounded at 6:14 station time, and by 6:15, the entire command deck of Relay Station Penathor knew three things. The breach was in Habitation Ring C, the automated lockdown had failed, and the station's senior emergency coordinator was already sprinting down the main corridor in her sleepwear, with her mandibles clicking at a frequency that meant someone was about to lose their career. Subcommander Veith of the Elori Regulatory Authority had not slept well. She had spent the previous evening reviewing the intake dossier for a human specialist scheduled to arrive on the morning shuttle, a pet behavioral assessor, according to the diplomatic manifest, which was a job title that had required Veith to consult 3 separate databases before she understood what it meant. The Coalition had assigned this human to evaluate the feasibility of introducing Earth companion animals to mixed-species stations, a proposal that the Elori High Council had voted against 17 times, and that the humans had resubmitted 18 times, each submission longer and more footnoted than the last. The human's name was Jonas Ecker. His companion animal was listed as Canis lupus familiaris, breed, St. Bernard. The attached veterinary clearance file contained a mass figure that Veith had read twice, closed the file, opened it again, and read a third time. 114 kilograms. The animal weighed more than most of the station's crew. She had filed a formal request to deny boarding. Station Administrator Chelek, a Kreshari bureaucrat who communicated primarily through size and the smell of disapproval, had denied the request on the grounds that the human carried full diplomatic clearance from Earth's Interspecies Cooperation Bureau. Now, 12 hours before the human was even scheduled to dock, the containment breach alarm was screaming, and the breach report said biological. Veith reached the security hub at 6:17. The hub was a circular room lined with hollow displays, currently staffed by 2 Pellic Night Watch officers, amphibious, translucent-skinned, nervous by physiology, and 1 Keshari environmental technician whose membrane filters were fluttering at a rate that told Veith the air in the room had changed. "Report," she said. Senior Watch Officer Pell, a Pellic whose gill slits flushed indigo when stressed, pointed to the feed from Corridor C7. "We registered an atmospheric displacement event in Habitation Ring C at 6:12. Sensors detected a large biological mass moving through the ring at approximately 2 meters per second. The mass is warm-blooded, approximately station ambient temperature, and is emitting a chemical compound the sensors are classifying as," he checked his screen, "saliva." Veith looked at the feed. The corridor camera showed an empty hallway with overhead emergency lights strobing amber. The walls were streaked with something wet and reflective. "Saliva," she repeated. "Insignificant volume, Subcommander." "Where is the biological mass now?" Pell switched feeds. Corridor C9. The camera showed a junction where 3 hallways met, and sitting in the center of it, directly under the junction's primary light fixture, was the largest living thing Veith had ever seen inside a station that did not have a cargo bay designation. It was a dog. She knew this because the intake dossier was still burned into her memory, but the dossier's mass figure had not prepared her for the reality. The animal was enormous, thick-boned, heavy-shouldered, with a broad skull, a jowly face, and a coat of white-tan-brown fur so dense it looked like insulation padding. It was sitting on the deck plating with its tongue out, its eyes half-closed, and a long strand of drool descending from its lower jaw in a slow, glistening rope that was pooling on the floor with the quiet inevitability of geological process. Its tail was wagging, slowly. The tail hit the corridor wall on the left stroke and a ventilation panel on the right, producing a rhythmic double thump that the sensors were apparently classifying as structural vibration. "That," Veith said, "is the containment breach." "The mass matches the diplomatic manifest's listed companion animal," Pell confirmed. "Breed, St. Bernard. The shuttle from Orbital Transfer 7 docked 40 minutes ago at Bay 12. The human passenger and his animal disembarked through standard processing. The animal was cleared through the biosecurity gate without incident. Then how is it in habitation, Ring C without its handler? Pell's gill slits flushed a deeper indigo. The human is in the intake office completing documentation. He listed the animal as another check, crate trained and calm in unfamiliar environments. The animal was placed in a temporary holding enclosure in the intake staging area. The holding enclosure rated for Class 4 containment. Magnetic seals, reinforced composite walls, ventilated lid. Veith looked at the feed again. The dog yawned, and its mouth opened to a size that made Pell take a half step back from the display. The yawn produced an audible vocalization that the corridor microphones picked up as something between a groan and a sigh, resonant enough to trigger the acoustic anomaly flag on Pell's console. The animal breached a Class 4 containment enclosure, Veith said. Not breached, Subcommander. The intake team reports that the enclosure is intact. The magnetic seal was disengaged from the inside. They believe the animal leaned on the release mechanism. Leaned on it. With its head, the mechanism is rated for 40 kilograms of sustained pressure. The animal weighs 114. Veith closed her eyes for 2 seconds. When she opened them, the dog was still sitting in the corridor junction, drooling onto her station's deck plating. Dispatch a security detail to contain the animal. Non-lethal restraint. I want it returned to the intake staging area before the human finishes his documentation. This was the first incident. The morning had 6 more. Security Detail Theta, 4 Elori officers in light tactical armor, each standing 6.5 feet tall with lean, jointed limbs and chitinous cranial ridges, arrived at Junction C9 at 6:24. They formed a containment perimeter around the dog, which was still sitting in the same spot, still drooling, and had now added a second activity. It was watching a small maintenance drone that was trying to clean the drool off the deck plating. The drone kept sliding in the puddle, recalibrating, approaching the drool from a different angle and sliding again. The dog watched this with an expression of mild, patient interest, the way a retiree might watch someone try to parallel park. Officer Thurick, the detail lead, approached with a capture loop, a telescoping pole with an electromagnetic noose designed for Class 3 fauna. He extended the loop toward the dog's neck. The dog looked at the loop, then at Thurick, then at the loop again. It did not flinch. It did not growl. It simply leaned its enormous head to the left, and the loop slid off the side of its skull the way water slides off a planet. Thurick tried again. The dog leaned right. The loop caught one ear, folded it gently backward, and slid off. The dog shook its head once, resettling the ear, and went back to watching the drone. The animal is non-compliant, Thurick reported over the comm. Non-compliant how? Veith asked. It is not aggressive, it is not fleeing, it is sitting. It simply does not fit into the capture loop. Its neck is wider than the loop's maximum aperture. Veith checked the specifications. The capture loop was rated for fauna up to 70 kilograms. Use 2 loops. They used 2 loops. The dog, with a patience that bordered on philosophical, allowed both loops to be placed around its neck. Then it stood up. The officers had not expected it to stand up. The animal rose to its full height, its shoulders level with Thurick's waist, its head level with his chest, and walked forward, not quickly, not aggressively, but with the unhurried momentum of a thing that weighed 114 kilograms and had decided to go somewhere else. The 2 officers holding the capture poles were pulled forward 3 steps before they braced. The dog stopped, looked back at them with an expression of amiable curiosity, and sat down again, in a different corridor. It had moved the containment perimeter 11 meters. Subcommander, Thurick said, his voice carrying a note that Veith had never heard from him before, the animal has relocated us. That was Incident 2. Incident 3 occurred at 6:41, when the dog discovered the station's communal water feature. Habitation Ring C contained a small atrium, a domed space with artificial daylight panels, a ring of ornamental flora from 7 different worlds, and a shallow reflecting pool that served as a meditative space for the pellet crew members who required periodic moisture exposure for their amphibious physiology. The pool was 12 meters in diameter, 30 centimeters deep, temperature regulated, and had been undisturbed for the 4 years since Penathor's commissioning. The dog walked into the atrium, crossed the ornamental garden, leaving paw prints in the manicured substrate that the station's horticultural AI would later log as catastrophic terrain deformation, padded to the edge of the reflecting pool, and stepped in. The splash was not dramatic. The dog did not leap or dive. It simply walked into the water with the same unhurried confidence it applied to everything, waded to the center, and lay down. The water rose to its shoulders. The pool's temperature regulators screamed a thermal alert as 114 kilograms of Deathworld mammal dumped its body heat into a system calibrated for ambient temperature pellet dermis. 2 pellet crew members who had been meditating at the pool's edge scrambled backward, gill slits flaring in alarm. One of them slipped on the wet substrate and sat down hard, producing a high-pitched vocalization that the station's universal translator rendered as an untranslatable exclamation. The other simply stared, both inner eyelids closed, outer eyelids wide, mouth slightly open. The dog sighed. It was a deep, resonant exhalation that sent ripples across the entire surface of the pool. Then it rested its chin on the water and closed its eyes. It was at this moment that Jonas Ecker arrived. Veith had been tracking his location through the station's personnel system. The human had finished his intake documentation at 6:33 and been informed that his animal had vacated the holding enclosure. He had said, according to the intake officer's report, "Yeah, he does that." He had then asked for directions to wherever the dog had gone, without urgency, without alarm, and with an expression the intake officer described as resigned familiarity. Ecker was 43 years old, broad-shouldered, with a face that had been weathered by years of working outdoors, and a posture that suggested he had long ago accepted that most of his days would not go according to plan. He wore a plain gray utility jacket over a coalition standard field uniform, and he carried a canvas bag over one shoulder that clinked when he moved, the sound, Veith would later learn, of collapsible water bowls, treat pouches, spare towels, and a collapsible squeegee. He walked into the atrium, looked at the reflecting pool, looked at the dog in the reflecting pool, and said, "Hugo." The dog opened one eye. Its tail began to wag underwater, sending small waves lapping against the pool's ornamental rim. It did not get up. "Hugo out." The dog's tail wagged harder. Its chin remained on the water. "Hugo." The dog sneezed, which displaced approximately 2 liters of pool water onto the atrium floor. Ecker set down his canvas bag, pulled out a towel, walked to the edge of the pool, and waded in. He was wearing boots. They filled with water immediately. He reached the dog, clipped a lead to its collar. Veith noted that the collar was heavy-gauge leather, scarred and worn, with a brass tag she couldn't read, and said, "Come on, big man." Hugo stood up. The displacement wave sloshed over the pool's rim on 3 sides and soaked the ornamental garden. The 2 pellet crew members scrambled further back. Ecker led the dog out of the pool, and Hugo shook himself. The shake was a physical event. 114 kilograms of water-saturated fur rotating at speed produced a radial spray pattern that reached every surface within a 4-meter radius. The artificial daylight panels caught the droplets, and for one absurd moment the atrium was filled with prismatic light, a rainbow arc of pool water and dog hair catching the engineered sunshine. The pellet who had fallen earlier made the untranslatable sound again. Ecker toweled the dog's face. Hugo leaned into it, eyes closing, tail wagging, and pressed his enormous skull against Ecker's chest with enough force that the human staggered back a step. "Sorry about the pool," Ecker said to no one in particular. "He likes water." Veith watched this from the security hub's feed, her mandibles working at a frequency she reserved for situations that defied procedural classification. She keyed the intake office. "Connect me to the human specialist." Ecker's face appeared on her display 30 seconds later. He was still wet. Hugo was visible behind him, sitting on the atrium floor, being toweled by one of the pellet crew members who had, in the intervening 30 seconds, apparently transitioned from alarm to fascination, and was now running both webbed hands through the dog's chest fur with an expression of scientific wonder. "Mr. Ecker, I am Subcommander Veith, Senior Emergency Coordinator. Your animal has triggered a containment breach alarm, defeated a Class 4 holding enclosure, relocated a 4-officer security detail, contaminated the Habitation Ring C meditative pool, and caused structural vibration alerts in 3 corridors. It has been aboard this station for 47 minutes. Ecker looked like a man who had heard variations of this speech many times. "I understand, Sub-Commander. He takes a little while to settle into new environments." "A little while." "He's curious. Once he's mapped the space, he calms down." Veith looked at the feed. Hugo had rolled onto his back, and the pellet crew member was now scratching his belly with the focused intensity of a researcher discovering a new element. The dog's rear leg was twitching in a rhythmic kick that was, once again, triggering the structural vibration sensors. "Mr. Ecker, your animal weighs more than my security detail's individual officers." "I know, he's on a diet actually," his vet back on Earth said. "I do not require his dietary history. I require him to stop triggering my station's emergency systems." "Yes, ma'am, I'll keep him with me from now on." This was Incident 3. Veith documented it in her morning report under Containment Failures, unclassified, and sent it to Station Administrator Chelek, who responded with a single-line acknowledgement that smelled, even through the digital medium, of weary resignation. Incidents 4 and 5 happened within 11 minutes of each other during the mid-morning meal period. Ecker had taken Hugo to the station's communal dining facility on Deck 2, a broad, low-ceilinged space where 6 species shared long tables under flat-spectrum lighting. He had secured Hugo beside his table using a reinforced tether clipped to a structural column. He had placed a water bowl on the floor, given Hugo a compressed nutrition bar, and sat down to eat his own meal. Hugo ate the nutrition bar in one bite. He then turned his attention to the tether. He did not chew it. He did not pull against it. He lay down beside the structural column with his chin on the floor and his eyes tracking the movement of every tray, plate, and food item that passed within visual range. His tail was still. His breathing was slow. Incident 4 began when a Vreth supply officer, a 9-foot arachnoid with armored chelicerae and a thorax plated in iridescent chitin, walked past Hugo's position carrying a tray of protein gel cubes. The Vreth was accustomed to being the largest, most intimidating presence in any dining facility on any station. Its chelicerae clicked as it walked, a sound that most species instinctively associated with predatory intent. Hugo's ears went forward. His nostrils flared. He lifted his head and tracked the protein gel cubes with the fixed, methodical attention of a targeting system. The Vreth noticed the dog for the first time. It stopped walking. All 8 of its compound eyes rotated to fix on Hugo. Its chelicerae went still. Hugo's tail began to wag, not fast, not aggressive, a slow, heavy pendulum sweep that thudded against the deck plating. The Vreth took a step back. Hugo stood up, walked to the end of his tether 3 meters from the structural column, and sat down directly in the Vreth's path. His tongue was out. His head was tilted to one side. His tail was wagging at the same slow, patient cadence. He was looking at the protein gel cubes. The vreth, a species that had evolved as apex ambush predators on a Class 9 world, took another step back. Its chelicerae began clicking rapidly, a stress response that the translator rendered as an unintelligible string of warnings. "He wants one of your cubes," Ecker said from his table, not looking up from his meal. The vreth looked at Ecker. It looked at Hugo. It looked at the protein gel cubes. Then, with the slow deliberation of a creature making a decision it did not fully understand, it placed one cube on the floor in front of the dog. Hugo ate it. Then he looked up at the vreth and wagged his tail harder. The vreth placed a second cube on the floor. Hugo ate it. Over the next 4 minutes, the vreth supply officer, a species that had never in recorded history voluntarily shared food with another organism, fed Hugo 7 protein gel cubes, one at a time, each placement more careful and deliberate than the last. By the 5th cube, the vreth's chelicerae had stopped clicking. By the 7th, it was crouching on its lower limbs, bringing the cube down to Hugo's eye level. Hugo, for his part, took each cube with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a mouth that large lips pulling back, front teeth delicately gripping the edge. A single soft chew, then a look upward that said, with absolute clarity, more. Incident 5 occurred 90 seconds later, when the smell of protein gel attracted a second dog to the dining facility. This was not Hugo. This was the station's only other Earth animal, a 3-year-old tabby cat named Pencil, who belonged to a Keshari environmental technician named Dro and who had been aboard the station for 2 years, living in Dro's quarters with a blanket and a food dish, and the quiet, invisible life of an animal that nobody noticed. Pencil noticed Hugo. Hugo noticed Pencil. The cat entered through the dining facility's service vent, landed on the counter beside the kitchen pass-through, and stopped. Hugo's tail went still. Pencil arched her back. Not a threat arch. Veith had studied enough Earth fauna behavior by this point to recognize the difference. This was a posture of assessment. The cat was 2.5 kilograms. The dog was 114. The cat held position for 4 seconds, then dropped off the counter, walked across the dining facility floor, past 14 alien crew members who froze as if witnessing a diplomatic incident, and stopped directly in front of Hugo. Hugo lowered his head. His nose touched the cat's nose. They held that position for 3 seconds. Then Pencil turned around, walked 2 paces, and lay down between Hugo's front legs. Hugo rested his chin on the cat's back. Pencil purred. Ecker watched this with the expression of a man who was not surprised, but was deeply tired. Veith watched it from the security hub and felt something she could not name, not alarm, not annoyance, but a loosening in the rigid procedural architecture of her day. She filed incidents 4 and 5 together under interspecies interaction, unclassified, and moved on. Incident 6 was the one that went to the station administrator. At 14:30 station time, Ecker was conducting his first formal assessment in the station's medical bay, evaluating the environmental stress markers in Hugo's biometrics after 6 hours aboard, a standard protocol for Earth animals in novel environments. Hugo was lying on the examination platform, which was rated for vreth officers, and therefore held his weight. Ecker was attaching a biosensor patch behind Hugo's left ear. The medical bay's chief physician, Dr. Anok, was a tall, thin Alari with silver-streaked cranial ridges and hands that moved with surgical precision. She had expressed initial concern about having a Deathworld apex predator in her medical bay. Ecker had explained that St. Bernards were historically bred for rescue work in Earth's alpine regions. Specifically, finding lost travelers in snowstorms and keeping them warm until help arrived. The animal's primary evolutionary function is finding injured people and lying on them, Ecker had said. Dr. Anok had processed this for several seconds. It finds the injured and applies its body mass. Essentially, yes. as a thermal source. And as a comfort, there's a psychological component. The weight and warmth reduce panic. It's called pressure therapy. Dr. Anok had looked at Hugo, who was lying on the exam platform with his eyes half closed and his tongue hanging off the side, leaving a slow drool trail on the medical-grade surface. This animal is a medical device. More or less. It was at this point that the station's gravity system glitched. Penathor was an older relay station, and its artificial gravity generators had been flagged for maintenance 3 times in the past cycle. The glitch lasted 4 seconds, a sudden reduction from standard 1G to approximately 0.3G, then a hard snap back to full gravity. It was brief enough that most personnel experienced it as a moment of disorientation, a lurch in the stomach, a stumble quickly corrected. Hugo experienced it differently. The sudden gravity reduction launched 114 kilograms of St. Bernard off the examination platform and into the air. Hugo, to his credit, did not panic. He spread his legs wide, his ears flattened, and he made a sound, a deep, resonant bark that the medical bay's acoustic monitors classified as an emergency vocalization at 112 decibels. When gravity snapped back, Hugo landed on the deck plating with a thud that registered on the station's seismic monitors. He scrambled upright, looked around with wide brown eyes, and immediately pressed himself against Ecker's legs with enough force to push the human backward into a supply cabinet. Then he began to check the room. It was not random. Veith, reviewing the footage later, could see the pattern. Hugo went to Dr. Anok first, pushing his nose against her knee, sniffing her hands, her lab coat, her face. When Dr. Anok flinched, Hugo pressed his body against her legs, not aggressively, not playfully, but with the steady, warm, deliberate weight of a thing that had been bred for 1,000 years to do exactly this. He leaned into her until her hands stopped trembling. Then he went to the medical bay's junior technician, a young pellic named Sir who was pressed against the far wall with every gill slit fully flared. Hugo walked to Sir, sat down in front of him and placed one massive paw on Sir's foot. He did not move. He simply sat there, warm and heavy and present, until Sir's gill slits began to settle. Then he went to the doorway and checked the corridor. Then he came back to Ecker, leaned against his legs again and sighed. Dr. Anok's hands were steady now. She looked at Hugo for a long time, then she looked at Ecker. The animal assessed every individual in the room for distress and administered pressure therapy, without instruction. That's his training, Ecker said, but mostly it's his temperament. Saints do this. They're wired for it. The gravity fluctuation did not affect his behavior. It affected him, he barked. But once he landed, he went to work. He's been doing this since he was 14 months old. Disaster simulation, crowded environments, panicked subjects. The more chaotic the room, the calmer he gets. Dr. Anok opened her data pad. I am entering a formal annotation in the medical bay's species interaction log. The annotation reads, Earth companion animal, breed St. Bernard, demonstrated autonomous triage assessment and administered species-appropriate physiological stabilization to 3 individuals of 2 species following an environmental event. No verbal command was issued. The animal acted on. She paused. What would you call it? Instinct, Ecker said. Trained instinct, centuries of breeding. But if you want the honest answer, he cares, he just does, he's a dog. Dr. Anok wrote something on her data pad. Veith, watching the feed, zoomed in. The doctor had written a single word in the annotation's classification field. The word was untranslatable from a lorry, but the closest rendering in human language was essential. That was Incident 6. Dr. Anok sent it to Station Administrator Chelek as a medical bay priority annotation. Chelek's response was 3 lines long and ended with a request for Veith to attend a briefing at 1600. The briefing, which was Incident 7, was the last. Veith arrived at the administrator's office to find Chelik behind his desk, Ecker in the visitor's chair, and Hugo lying on the floor between them. The dog's chin was resting on Chelik's foot. The administrator was not moving his foot. He was not looking at the dog. He was looking at his data pad with an expression that Veith recognized as a man trying very hard not to acknowledge something. "Sub-Commander," Chelik said, "please sit." Veith sat. Hugo's tail thumped against her ankle. She did not move her ankle. "I have received 7 incident reports today regarding the human's companion animal. Containment breach, security detail relocation, pool contamination, unauthorized feeding, interspecies contact without a behavioral assessment, gravity event response. Each one arrived on my desk within hours, each one from a different department, and each one," he set his data pad down, "concludes with a recommendation that the animal remain on station." Veith's mandibles went still. "Excuse me, Administrator. Officer Thurick's report on the security detail relocation concludes with a request to study the animal's locomotion patterns for application to crowd management doctrine. The Pellic Meditation Coordinator has submitted a proposal to designate the pool encounter as a," he read from the pad, "cross-species hydrotherapy event, and has requested the animal's regular participation. The Vreth Supply Officer who shared his protein, gel cubes, has filed a cultural exchange form. Dr. Anilk has classified the animal as a medical resource and requested permanent bay access." And Sub-Inspector Dren, Chelik paused, and something in his expression shifted, "has filed a personal request to be assigned as the animal's station liaison." He used the word bonded. Veith looked at Ecker. Ecker was scratching behind Hugo's ear. The dog's eyes were closed. His tail was wagging slowly, bumping Chelik's desk leg with each stroke. "Mr. Ecker," Veith said, "when you told me this morning that your animal takes a little while to settle into new environments, I meant it." He settled now. Hugo opened one eye, looked at Veith, and made a sound. Not a bark, not a whine, a low, soft vocalization, a grumble that vibrated in the big dog's chest that the translator flagged as untranslatable. Veith did not need the translator. She had heard the sound before, in the recordings she had reviewed, in the medical bay footage, in the pool atrium. It was the sound Hugo made when he was lying beside someone. It was the sound he made when the room was quiet and the people in it were calm, and the big, impossible, 114-kilogram problem was doing the only thing it had ever been bred to do. Being present, being warm, being there. Chelik looked at Veith. "Sub-Commander, your recommendation." Veith looked at her data pad. 7 incidents, 4 departments, 3 species comforted, 1 meditative pool contaminated, 1 security detail physically relocated by a tail wag and a head lean, 1 holding enclosure defeated by a dog resting its face on a release button. She looked at Hugo. He was looking back at her with brown eyes that held no urgency, no demand, no agenda, just a steady, warm, patient gaze. His tail thumped against her ankle again. "My recommendation," Veith said, and paused, because what she was about to say violated 17 sections of the Ilori Regulatory Authority's Fauna Management Code, and she was going to say it anyway, "is that we extend the companion animal station clearance to permanent residential status, with conditions." Chelik leaned back. "Conditions?" "He stays with his handler at all times." "Correction, he stays near his handler at all times. I have reviewed the footage and the animal does not respond to confinement. He responds to proximity. He stays calm when Mr. Ecker is in range, and he checks the room when something goes wrong. I do not recommend confining a thing that does that. I recommend giving it room to work." Chelik was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The Council voted against Earth companion animals on mixed species stations 17 times. 18, Administrator. The humans submitted the proposal 18 times. And your assessment after today?" Veith looked at Hugo one last time. The dog was asleep now. His enormous head was resting on Chelek's foot, his body curled on the office floor, his breathing slow and deep. One ear was folded over. A strand of drool was making its slow, inevitable descent toward Chelek's shoe. Chelek was not moving his foot. "My assessment," Veith said, "is that the 19th submission should be approved." The room was quiet except for the sound of Hugo breathing. The station hummed around him, environmental systems, gravity generators, the constant low thrum of a relay station doing its work. And at the center of it, 114 kilograms of Earth, asleep, warm and unbothered, dreaming whatever slow, kind, impossible dreams a St. Bernard dreams when the room is finally still and all the people in it are accounted for. Ecker reached down and rested his hand on Hugo's shoulder. "Good boy," he said. Hugo's tail moved once, a single heavy thump against the deck plating that Veith's data pad registered as a minor seismic event. She did not file a report.